Welcome to episode 10 in the KIPS Personal Trainer Application Podcast. My name is Tyler Valencia, and I'm the president of KIPS and Kettlebell Concepts. In this episode, we have Dr. Jason Karp, who is a running specialist based in San Diego, California. Dr. Karp has a PhD in Exercise Physiology from Indiana University and was the 2011 IDEA Personal Trainer of the Year. In this episode, we were talking about one of the most fundamental forms of training that is not dissected in personal training education. That is running. Throughout this episode, Dr. Karp will share his insights on running drills, treadmill running benefits, the differences in running shoes, and how strength training fits into a running program. Let's jump into the episode. For entry-level personal trainers or even experienced trainers, sometimes when we're working with clients, we will just have the tendency just to throw them on the treadmill and hit the timer 5-10 minutes, and we don't really have a goal in mind or even really critiquing them. Maybe we're just working on building a relationship with them. But today with our guest, Dr. Karp, you are somebody that has a wealth of knowledge in running. And to start off, what do you think are some really key assessments or even visual assessments that you would do with a client to get a better understanding of their running performance or even their current status?
Well, the first is to really just get an idea of their background as a runner and what led them to me to help them and understand the full picture. Know how much running they've done in the past and what their goals are and all the kind of the basic stuff. But to really just get an understanding of their background in running. Like you said, some people are brand new to this and they've never run before, and so there's a lot of things that we can do with them to practice running technique as well as the training aspect. There's the whole technical aspect of running. But there's other people who've been running for 10 years. It's very hard to change running form in somebody who's been running for that long because it's so ingrained already. Mm-hmm. So, it would only really address those things if they're doing specific things that could potentially lead to an injury. But in new runners, there's a lot that you can do. I mean, especially when you just visually, look at them run, because there's a lot of tiny little flaws that people make when they're not used to running. The most obvious one of which is landing with their foot way out in front of their center of mass. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that, you can correct through the use of drills and those kinds of things to just get them to learn to break down the actual technical part of running into its pieces and get them to learn to land directly underneath their center of mass.
Yeah. And as we were talking a little bit before the podcast, with trainers, experienced trainers, entry-level trainers, the use of the treadmill is often that time to connect and maybe asking about how their day is or, just rambling about things just to create a connection. But really, there are some things that I think you could work with them on the treadmill or even off the treadmill. In your experience and working with clients that are competing for a marathon or even a half marathon or even these endurance competition, do you notice any type of difference between maybe the treadmill and outdoor running?
The technical aspect is actually very similar. The only difference with the treadmill is that the belt will pull your leg back when it lands. Mm-hmm. But despite what people think about it being so much different, the research is there's been actually a lot of research to compare treadmill running to overground running, and running form really doesn't change when you go from overground running to treadmill running. But in terms of trying to help people learn proper technique, it's going to be best to do that off the treadmill. Mm-hmm. Because the treadmill, like I said, will assist the movement of the legs, and then if the treadmill is assisting you, then the person is not going to learn that. The way the person's muscles are recruited to move the leg on its own is not going to be ingrained. So it's better to learn the technique over ground and then apply that when you go onto the treadmill.
Yeah.
But the treadmill allows you to do specific workouts that would be harder to duplicate outside, specifically like a hill workout. You can manipulate the grade of the hill at your own will rather than have to go find a hill of a certain grade outside. And of course, then also when you do a hill workout outside, you have to run back down the hill, and there's a lot of soreness that comes from running downhill. You can avoid all of that on a treadmill because you can just just have the uphill portion. You don't have to run back down the hill to do the next hill rep.
Really great.
So, the treadmill enables you to do things that would be hard to duplicate doing the same kind of a workout outside. Having said that, outdoor running is I don't want to say better, but specifically if you're training for a race, well, all the races they're not on the treadmill. So there's the whole specificity of training principle that you want to train on the terrain that you're going to be running the race on.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been people who have trained for marathons purely by running on a treadmill. It's possible, but it's not the most ideal.
For maybe people that you work with specifically, do you have maybe if they are running on a treadmill, do you have like maybe a recommendation that, maybe 2 weeks, a month, 2 months out, that you suggest that they do start running outside on the path?
Well, I would always suggest that they run outside. I would always suggest they do the treadmill if they're taking some class at a gym that they want to be part of that group workout, or if they're running on their own, that if the weather is so bad outside that they can't get the workout done because of the climate, then they can duplicate the workout on the treadmill. But except for those cases, I would always say to run outside. It's always going to be a better experience because you're outside in nature, or you're doing the workout on a bike path or even on a track. So I would always suggest that people run outside, but in certain circumstances, it might be better to do the workout on a treadmill if you can't get the same kind of a workout done outside.
Yeah, agreed. When we're talking about drills, and I like what you said about the treadmill, what it offers, whether it's incline running or being able to find a specific grade that you want to work out. When I think about grade running, there's two different hills that are in my head. I grew up in Manhattan Beach, California, and we have a pretty famous hill. It's not as used as much anymore due to regulations that were put on a sand hill, but it's called Sand Dune Hill, and athletes would come and run up it. They would do drills on it, and just going one time up it, and you can't really run up it because it's so steep. But just being able to replicate some form of that in a controlled environment on a treadmill, and then how you said being able to decrease that grade for less impact on the joints and what that has in recovery. You can't really put a value on that. It's so valuable for somebody and their training experience and even time. You can only imagine if you had to run up this humongous hill, or and the time that it takes to get back to your starting point on a treadmill. That's just one simple button, just pressing it and watching it decrease automatically right there. So for personal trainers that are working with clients that want to improve the running, want to improve their endurance, are there some specific drills that are maybe your go-to or your favorites?
I have a list of running technique drills that I use with people to practice and ingrain the running technique. So all kinds of things that a lot of people, if they ran track in high school, they might remember some of the high school drills that we all did. And so it's really just about breaking down the running form into its components and learning, actively placing your foot on the ground directly underneath you, and how the leg and the foot goes through the running cycle, and breaking that down into its parts. So you work from the whole movement and then break it down into parts and then go back to the whole movement. And, that gets into the whole area of skill acquisition and how you practice in off sports, how do you practice a golf swing, or how do you practice throwing a baseball. And so it's the whole, the whole method of training the movement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I have a whole repertoire of drills that I'll take people through to practice that. Nice.
I would personally I see the value in these drills being incorporated even before work. I ran track in high school, and I do some of those drills before I even work out. These days, throughout the day, I sit down a lot. So just getting out in my backyard and doing some of these drills, some skips, some leg kicks, and all that kind of stuff, just to get the blood flowing, get the joints moving. I see great value in that. And
Yeah.
for personal trainers in general, even in a gym setting, taking their client and doing some of these, they are probably in similar situations. They've been sitting or they've been at work in one type of posture. So getting them, either if your gym has a basketball court or even just a side space that you can do some of these things, I think that there's some value in those. That's something different than just, okay, I'm going to put you on the treadmill for 5 minutes and then I'm going to take you to this area. We're going to do a couple stretches. It put some value for the trainer, that and their knowledge and their ability to, provide something that's different than just the norm.
Yeah, exactly. And then the drills can also be used for things like dynamic flexibility.
Yep.
So it kind of serves a dual purpose, that you can do it as its own separate workout to practice running technique and to ingrain the form. But then, like you said, you do it like before a workout. You can also do it as part of your warm-up routine, as part of the dynamic flexibility that you do right before the workout.
Yep. With what we're talking about now, with these learning these drills and the mechanics of running and all these types of stuff. When I was in my graduate program, I had the privilege of one of the seminars I had to attend was about running economy and basically analyzing your client. I believe you have a course that's for individuals, but do you have any? Can you talk a little bit about your course, but also maybe any courses that you recommend that are specifically for personal trainers?
Yeah, so my course is specifically on running, the running certification course, just like there's so many certification courses in the fitness industry, but running has been pretty much neglected despite its popularity and its effectiveness for making people fit, and especially for things like weight loss. So my course covers everything about running: physiology, technique, training, workouts, program design, running for weight loss,
Wow.
creating new programming for gyms so they can increase revenue. Because that's something that's always interested me, that you walk into any big box gym and there are no classes being done on the treadmill. They're like other group exercise classes. You don't have like the spinning version on the treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no programming that's ever done in gyms, despite how many people run. Running is the largest segment of the fitness market, yet most gyms neglect it. And so it's an area that people can, the gyms can generate more revenue.
Yep.
When people want to train for a race, they don't go to their local gym to get help to do that, which is remarkable to me, because that's where the fitness experts are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And yet no one's going to their local gym to get a half marathon training program. And so
Yeah.
I'm slowly trying to change that, to get gyms to see that this is an opportunity for them to tap into the millions of people. There's 20 million people who run a race in the US every year. So this is a huge market for gyms to tap into.
Oh yeah. What's kind of funny is 100% agree with you that gyms aren't tapping into these. And I, at the time or right now, I do not train clients. I, create my education with KIPS and work with contractors and educators to develop more education. And before that, I actually used to do a class that had a treadmill portion of it. And I'm trying to recall the name. It was a pretty corny name. I think it was Tread and Shred or something like that. But what was kind of interesting, and it just kind of shows the state of the use of a treadmill, is for the portion done on the treadmill. When I took over this class, they were actually shocked on the things that I would do with them. I would do drills with them. I would do warm-ups with them. They were just used to somebody, just how I've been kind of saying, they just hit the timer and, okay, we're going to do the treadmill for X amount of time. So they were really shocked in terms of what they can do to improve their running, what they can do prior in terms of dynamic warm-ups, get their blood flowing, and then even the intervals that I incorporated with them, using the grade, using their speed, and always keeping individualized to them. That was the big thing that they didn't understand, is the percentages that I was giving them. They were so used to, well, what speed is that? And I'm like, well, it's based on yourself. You gotta learn about yourself, what you're capable. And so these types of things are hopefully becoming more available, like things with your course where trainers can understand that type of programming. Because I personally believe in, and I've yet to see this type of education made available in a certification for personal trainers, an entry-level personal training program.
Right. Well, yeah, that's why, I mean, I'm happy that we've had quite a bit of success with this so far, that we're in 23 countries already with the certification program. I'm very proud of that, but of course I want it to be even larger. I
Yeah.
want this to be the place where people come to learn about running.
Oh yeah. And I think that what you can offer as a personal trainer and having a certification like this just opens it up, because when we get, and you can speak to this as well, when we work with clients, they have some type of already preconceived feelings about running or what they believe is going to work. And so being able to have more knowledge in that area is only going to make your offerings that much stronger.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Now,
mean, my
so
goal is to create experts, and so that when they work with their clients, that they can give them expert advice and expert training. Because I do think, without sounding too critical, I do think that that's a big missing piece from the fitness industry.
oh yeah.
The industry, unlike other industries, the fitness industry does not mandate an education. You look at a similar field, physical therapy. To become a physical therapist, everybody has to go to graduate school. You have to get a master's or doctorate in physical therapy in order to call yourself a physical therapist and to be able to provide that service.
Mm-hmm.
To be a middle school or high school physical education teacher, same thing. You have to go to school and have a degree in physical education. And the same standards don't exist in the fitness industry.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. I think it lowers the performance of the entire industry. It also lowers the way the industry is perceived.
Mm-hmm.
People don't perceive trainers the way they perceive physical therapists.
Yep.
That's because of the lack of education that is required for the position.
Agreed.
But
Agreed.
that's a difficult thing to change. I mean, in an ideal world, I think every trainer would be required to have a degree, and I really think that personal training should work the same way as physical therapy. That because exercise is medicine, there's so much research to show that doctors should be prescribing a personal trainer just the same way they write a prescription for a physical therapist. When you have an injury, you take that prescription to the physical therapy office and it's covered by insurance. It should work exactly the same way in the fitness industry. When somebody has a few risk factors for cardiovascular disease, a sedentary lifestyle is one of the primary risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And the other risk factors can be mitigated by exercising. And
Yep.
so when somebody has those risk factors, they go to the doctor should be able to write a prescription. Here's a prescription for personal training. You take that to your local gym and you'd be able to work with a personal trainer and it's covered by insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I think it should be done. But for that to happen, the industry has to start mandating an education for every single personal trainer.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Once that happens, then I think we can put other steps in place to have the service be covered by insurance and have doctors write prescriptions for it.
Yeah. Oh, I will say that is a very, I don't want to call it heated topic, but it's one that I believe in a couple episodes we've talked about that the licensure or the education, the entry level requirements for the industry, and um, I know that's one that 10 years ago they were talking about in when I was in college, and it's still something that goes back and forth, and just how you said, that is one of the things with the credibility of the industry. I see the benefit in that, and in my mind, that there's also the business end of it, and being a business owner that sells education for personal trainers, there's that aspect. So it's I honestly don't know when what'll happen, but it's definitely something where those outcomes that you talked about for clients, for being able to decrease health risks and those things associated with it, there's such a big benefit for that. And hopefully we can see those types of things. Just how you said, it's not just cardiovascular disease. There's so many other aspects of it that'll be improved. And I mean, the one that I always talk about that's not as mentioned as frequently is mental health. And I think you'll probably like this because I've seen your posts on, we're friends on Facebook, and I think you might even posted something about that today, is the mental health aspect of it, just the clarity and the mental well-being associated with exercise is just so big. And there's a piece of research that whenever I talk about adolescent exercise, it's one of my favorites, and I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head, but it talks about adolescents in middle school and their development with fundamental movements. And of course, it talks about the physical aspects and the outcomes associated, but it mentions the physical well-being, the mental aspect too, that these kids, that if they are able to master these fundamental movements in middle school, that they will show a better self-image later on in life, have a higher chance of exercise later on in life, all these things associated with mental well-being, that it's almost like, well, why aren't we doing these with kids, with adolescents? Why are we incorporating these things so much? And it's such a hot topic, a key thing, but yet we see those things falling through the cracks.
Yeah, I talk about some of the mental research in one of my books, and some of it will also be done. I was supposed to give a TED talk a couple of weeks ago, or last week, but everything has been postponed now. So in the fall, I'll be talking about this at the TED stage as well. But that there's a lot of research to show that exercise changes you on the inside. Specifically, it changes things in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of research to show that aerobic exercise, specifically running, ameliorates symptoms of depression just as if not more effective as the prescription drugs.
Wow.
For people who have depression. It increases serotonin in the brain, which is what's lacking in people who have clinical depression. And then also the whole runner's high that people have heard about, that's from the release of opioids and cannabinoids in the brain. So it's the same thing as like smoking pot. It has releases the same chemicals in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of research like with older people, and running has been shown to decrease the incidence of Alzheimer's disease and improves cognitive function. So there's quite a bit of research. And you mentioned school children. There's a lot of research to show that kids who exercise perform better in school academically. So there's actually there's a mountain of research to show that exercise is not just good for your physical body, it's also good for the chemistry of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's not talked about a lot. And so I always am talking about how people think I'm funny. I talk about how we're animals. People don't think of humans as animals. We somehow think we're different than animals. And the truth is, we're really much more similar than we are different. The only thing that makes us different is our more highly processed brain. And so people need to remember that we are animals first. And so we are physical beings. The human existence is physical. And so if we get back to what it means to be an animal and be physically active, that changes you on the inside. You don't need to start from the inside. You start from the outside. You start from who we are as animals. Mm-hmm. A sound body creates a sound mind, which is, of course, a twist on the famous term, a sound mind and a sound body. I believe if we start on the body first, we work from the outside, and that changes us on the inside. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot in our society, especially since we live in a sedentary society. We're moving further and further away from what it means to be an animal. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that people don't think about is that evolution has not stopped with us. We are just one step. Time keeps going. We're just one exit on the highway. The highway keeps going forever. And so if we keep up this sedentary lifestyle, then future generations, we're going to get further and further away from what we evolved to be right now. A million years from now, a human being is going to be quite physically different, because we're not going to keep the same abilities, the physical abilities that we have now and that our ancestors had. We're not going to keep those same abilities if we don't need to use them. And so we have to keep using them. Otherwise, if we were able to see what a human looks like a million years from now, if we keep on the same path that we are now, a human being will look quite physically different, mm-hmm. which is a shame, because now we're built to move. But if we stop moving, that's going to change future generations of humans.
Yeah. And that's good stuff, really good stuff. And, the aspect that I think about with physical exercise, physical activity, and working with adolescents, going a step back with that is what it has, the payoff later on in life. And just a small little story about, I guess you could say it's a client. It's my cousin, a cousin that I'm helping with exercise. He's a teenager and he's just getting into physical activity. And the aspect that I always share with him is this is just the initial part of your introduction with exercise. There's going to be so many different pieces of this that come into play later on. Just what you're learning in terms of the consistency, the health benefits, and how this is going to pay off in your work, in your schoolwork, and in the future. Those are elements that we don't even talk about, and it's so important. And you see these things, and the example that I always come back to is with Arnold. Every exercise or fitness professional always has their some type of Arnold story. And I remember in one of his documentaries, he talked about how exercise is what taught him the consistency, what it means to wake up early and consistently do his exercise, and what that taught him for business, and how that later paid off for him.
Yeah, there are a lot of lessons that you can transfer from being physically active to the rest of your life.
Oh yeah. So, while we start getting towards the end of this podcast, I got to ask the common question, because it's one that every trainer will have to answer, is the whole talk about shin splints. Can you provide some insight on shin splints?
Yeah, so the medical term for shin splints is medial tibial stress syndrome. So it's stress to the tibia bone, which is the major bone in the lower part of the leg. So a lot of new runners get it because they're not used to the stress of, when you run, especially when you run over ground, there's stress to the bone. The tibia is the weight-bearing bone. The fibula doesn't bear weight. It's not, it doesn't bear weight on when you land. It's the tibia that bears the weight. And so it's a common injury that people have when they first start running. But it's not dangerous, and it will go away once the bone adapts. Bones are actually very good at adapting to stress more quickly than tendons and even muscles. Mm-hmm. The bones, there's a law, this Wolff's Law, it's called, named after the guy who discovered this, that bones become more dense, with the stress. So it's like why weight-bearing exercise is very good for senior citizens, especially females, because estrogen is the single biggest protective effect on bones. And so when women get older and they go through menopause and they lose the protective effect of estrogen, that's why so many older women have problems with their bones and get fractures. And so weight-bearing exercise is especially important for older people. Mm-hmm. But even young runners, a lot of high school runners, myself included, got shin splints when we first started running in high school. And that's relatively common, but it goes away after the bone is used to the stress. So if you run every day or every other day, over time, eventually the bone will recognize the stress and adapt to it, and you get more dense, and then the shin splints will go away. Mm-hmm. But you have to be a little careful, because if you keep pushing through, if you do too much, then the shin splints could potentially turn into a stress fracture, and that's what you don't want to have. So as long as you don't add too much stress too quickly, you just add a little bit, allow the bone to adapt to that, and then you add a little bit more. As long as you allow time for adaptation, then the stress in the shin splints will eventually go away, and you won't feel it anymore. I haven't had it in 30 years or something. Mm-hmm. So it's a fairly common thing among new runners, because their bones just are not used to that stress, but it's pretty harmless unless you add stress too quickly, and then it could potentially turn into a hairline stress fracture.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend any of the, I don't want to call them the traditional remedies for it, in terms of stretching, new shoes, working on running mechanics, or do you find those very useful?
To eliminate the shin splints?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. You can think about conditions that will lower the stress on the bone. So yes, having cushioning shoes rather than wearing like a minimalist shoe. Like if you have one of those minimalist shoes, yeah, that's just going to put more stress on the bone initially. So maybe over time that could work, but initially, all that's going to do is just add more stress. Mm-hmm. So yeah, shoes can help, and running on softer surfaces can help. If you're always running on the concrete, well, that's like the hardest surface you can run on. So those kinds of things will exacerbate the problem because it's just more stress to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
As far as running technique, that could also come into play because, like we were talking about earlier, how the biggest technical flaw that people make is that they land with their foot out in front of their center of mass. So they severely heel strike. And so when that happens, the time that stress is applied to the lower leg is greater because your foot is in contact with the ground for longer before it goes through the stance phase and eventually is lifted off the ground and move through the swing phase to come back in front of you. If you land with your foot directly underneath you, that reduces what's called the loading rate. So every time you land on the ground, you're applying force to the ground. And as we all learned in high school with Isaac Newton, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when you land on the ground and apply force to the ground applies a force that is equal in magnitude and opposite in direction to the force that you're applying to the ground. So when you land with your foot out in front of your center of mass, that increases the loading rate, the rate at which this stress is loaded on the body, because your foot is now going to be in contact with the ground for longer. So that's something that you can work on to try to get your foot directly underneath your center of mass so that your entire body, your entire frame is on top of where you are loading, rather than have your foot out in front of you by itself. Then all of that force is being applied to the tibia bone, which is not going to be helpful, especially if you're already exhibiting stress shin splints. So that's a technical issue that can help resolve the shin splints by reducing the loading rate of the force by trying to get your foot directly underneath your center of mass.
That is a golden nugget right there. That is huge right there for those that I'm sure every trainer has had that client that talks about that, especially if they are inactive and going into a physical activity program, whether it's incorporating running or even depending on how inactive they were before, just getting that moving, they could work with those types of clients. So
that seems to be a big problem. For some reason, new runners, more do it than not do it. They just automatically, flare their leg out, and they're severe heel strikers. And that's where maybe some of the barefoot running can actually be beneficial. Like, I wouldn't go and run like 5 miles barefoot, but if you take someone out on like a grass field or some other soft surface and you have them do running drills barefoot, then they'll quickly learn how to place their foot underneath their center of mass, because it would hurt to do it any other way. Like, if you try to land severely on your heel when you're running barefoot, that hurts to do that. And so you're not going to do that. And so by running barefoot, I wouldn't do this like on asphalt or concrete or anywhere where it's a hard surface. And like I said, I wouldn't do it like go run a mile or two. You do little drills where, you're not just trying to go out on a distance run, because that's going to hurt you too, to do that barefoot if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
So you can do like certain drills in the grass barefoot where you learn how to place your foot underneath your center of gravity.
Yep. Well, I remember doing those in high school. We would, at certain points in our training, we would go to the football field. Everyone would take their shoes off, and we would do these types of drills.
It's great for that.
Yeah, but you really hit on something that I will admit that I don't really know that much about in terms of footwear. I think that is something that trainers get asked about sometimes, is footwear. With the popularity that we've seen in the last, maybe 10 years with these minimalist shoes. Can you shed some light on the differences in those?
Yeah, so there's 3 major kinds of running shoes. The most common one that most people get they're either called cushioning, or sometimes they're called neutral, because for people who have neutral stance, so when they land on the ground, their foot doesn't severely roll inward or outward, that it stays pretty neutral, it's pretty aligned. That's why sometimes those shoes are called neutral. But it used to just be called cushioning, because they were just meant to provide cushioning. Then for people who pronate, so the natural rolling inward of the foot when you land on the ground is called pronation. And we're supposed to do that to some degree. That's how we absorb shock. But some people do it a little too much, and their foot rolls inward way too, it collapses inward. And so there are shoes to prevent that, and those are called stability shoes because they offer more stability. And then in the very extreme pronation case, we have shoes that are called motion control. So they do exactly that. They control the motion of your foot to try to force your foot in a neutral position. Most of the population, like 90% of the population, needs the basic cushioning neutral shoe. Then there's a much smaller percentage that needs the stability, and a very small percentage, I think it's a 3%, that need the motion control shoe.
Wow.
But most running shoe stores, most specialty running shoe stores will divide their shoe, they'll categorize them when they're up on the rack. So they'll label them, cushioning neutral and stability and motion control. And so you can try on different shoes based on their category, and then with the help of the people in the store, some of the larger running shoe stores will have a treadmill in the store, and they can put you on the treadmill and even film you so they can watch what your foot is doing when it lands on the treadmill, and then they can guide you into what kind of shoe you need. But most people, unless they have some weird aberrant biomechanics that need to be corrected, most people will use a cushioning or neutral shoe.
Really?
But, yeah, so I don't know if that helps. That makes the decision a little bit easier, because people do get confused by what shoe is the best. So, you see this on social media all the time. People always ask, what shoe should I get? And, it always bothers me when people give out a brand recommendation, because Nike is no better than Brooks, which is no better than Saucony, which is no better than Asics. Each of these companies has the three categories of shoes. Nike tends to specialize in the cushioning shoe. I'm not aware of many shoes that Nike has that are the stability or the motion control. Most, if not all, of Nike shoes are of the cushioning neutral type. But all the other companies, they all have the other kinds of shoes as well. But no company is any better or any worse than any other company. Nike perhaps does the most marketing. Maybe they spend the most amount of money on marketing to get people's attention. But they're no better or no worse than any other company. Mm-hmm. And what the research shows is that, take a guess on what is the single biggest factor that makes someone choose one shoe over another. It's actually comfort. If you have people go into a store and try on different pairs of shoes, comfort is actually what makes people choose one shoe over another. So it's funny how the research ends up giving you the common sense answer. I mean, of course, people are not going to wear a shoe that's not comfortable. So yeah, if you need a cushioning shoe, but you're trying to run in a stability shoe, well, it's not going to feel very good because it's not going to move in the natural way that your foot moves. You want the shoe to move the way your foot moves. You want it to feel like it's an extension of your foot. So it's helpful to know which of the three categories you fall under.
Yeah, no,
but once you know that, then the selection of shoe just comes down to comfort. You can just try on a bunch of cushioning neutral shoes and decide which feels the most comfortable.
That's good insight. Really good insight. Like I mentioned before, that is something that I really don't have that much knowledge on that area, just because it's a little bit outside of my scope, but it's very useful for trainers.
It's part of the technology. People don't realize how much technology there is in shoes these days. Nike has been bringing that to the forefront with their fancy shoes that a lot of marathoners wear. And so they brought that concept of technology now into the forefront of people's minds. But for many, when Nike was first developed, and they first were founded in the early 1970s, even back then, there was still quite a lot of technology that went into the formation of these running shoes and how forces are displaced, because that's all about, injury prevention, is being able to disperse the forces when you land on the ground so that all the force is not being distributed to one part of your foot, because that's how injuries can happen. It's all about where, how much force is applied and the direction of that force. And so you want a shoe that helps to disperse that force along the whole surface area of your foot so that you reduce the risk of injury, reduce the pressure. Everybody knows that, the example I always use to describe this is like, if you take your entire arm and put it on the table, flat on the table, all of the force of your arm, the weight of your arm, is dispersed along the whole surface area of your arm. But then if you take your arm and just rest it on the elbow, you can feel the pressure difference because now the weight of your arm is all centered on the point of your elbow. So the force hasn't changed, it's still the weight of your arm, but now you're changing how that force is distributed or dispersed along the surface area. Mm-hmm. And so that's what a lot of shoes try to do, is to disperse that force along the whole surface area of your foot.
Really good.
It's all about shock absorption. So there's a lot of technology in it, the types of material, and there's engineers that work at Nike and all these other companies. It's all engineering. Yep. Strength of materials. It's just like if you build a bridge, it's all about understanding the different strength of different materials and how to disperse forces along the length of a bridge so that the bridge doesn't collapse. The same concept.
Really insightful there. Really insightful. And for the podcast takeaway, and I think this is going to help tie everything together, especially for personal trainers in general, because I know we talked about the shin splints, we're talking about shoes, the footwear and its importance, and even incorporating this into a personal training program. I remember when I was working on my master's, and we had a course that had a little bit of running aspect to it, and talking about running economy and plyometrics and strength training. Where do you personally see strength training and plyometrics fitting into a running program?
That's a really good question. If you watch social media a lot, there's a lot of online coaches that really push the strength training. Mm-hmm. But it has its place, but only under certain circumstances. So, I mean, I guess I could retreat by saying it depends on what the goals are of the runner. Mm-hmm. If the goals are, to get fit and to look good and to feel good, then certainly I would say strength training. But if the goal is to improve running performance, especially long distance running performance, like half marathon and marathon, you would be better off focusing on the specific physiological factors that influence performance for those races. And strength training has limited, if any, value in addressing those physiological factors. It doesn't improve your VO2 max. It doesn't improve your lactate threshold. There is research to show that strength training can improve running economy through a neural mechanism, but the strength training has to be done a particular way. It has to be power type training, very heavy weights with very few reps per set, or like you mentioned, the plyometrics. The purpose of plyometrics is to increase the rate of force development, how quickly your muscles can produce force against the ground. And so when you do things like that, then it can help with muscle fiber recruitment and improve running economy. And economy is the amount of oxygen that you consume to maintain a given submaximal speed. So the less oxygen you consume to maintain a given speed, the more economical you are. And you can improve that through metabolic ways, training, and you can improve that through neural ways. And that's where the heavy strength training or the plyometrics can improve economy through a neuromuscular mechanism. But that aside, I would say that it's better for people to first focus on the metabolic and cardiovascular aspects of running performance. So really to optimize their running training first, increase the mileage, increase the intensity of their workouts, do enough workouts to address lactate threshold and VO2 max and all these other physiological factors. Strength training should be the last thing that people do if they still have the energy to do more training. And so like if you take someone who runs 20 miles a week and you have a decision to make, do you stay at 20 miles a week and strength train, or do you not strength train and use that time to go from 20 miles a week to 30 miles a week, which is going to have the more direct impact on that runner's performance? Mm-hmm. Obviously going from 20 miles a week to 30 miles a week. And so most people have plenty of room in their running training to focus on or to increase, whether it's the increase in volume and an increase in intensity or increase in the volume of intensity. There's many more places for people to improve their running performance than to do the strength training. And if they're going to strength train, like I said, it has to be of the right kind. It's not this body weight circuit training that you see all over social media, doing burpees and other calisthenics. that's not going to transfer to being able to hold a faster pace for 13 miles or 26 miles, because it's a very different kind of activity. Doing burpees and lunges and all that kind of stuff is not going to help you. It's not going to improve your lactate threshold or VO2 max. It's not going to help you hold a faster pace. You have to do the specific running training to do that. And the best strength training for runners may very well be hill training, doing a series of hill reps. You can do long hill reps to focus on the more endurance factors like VO2 max. And then you can do short hill sprints to focus on power and strength. There's a plyometric nature to running a short, steep hill because your foot is in contact with the ground for a very short period of time, and you're trying to project yourself up the hill. So, the lower leg musculature, the calves, the Achilles tendon, very short hill sprints is probably much better than doing burpees and other kinds of jumping activities. So I would say to people that if they want to strength train, first maximize all your other training. And then if you want to strength train on top of that, make the strength training very specific to the running. Hill training is perhaps the best type of strength training, power training for running.
Really good advice. Really good advice right there. And really insightful. And, that's stuff that trainers can apply immediately if they're working with clients that are wanting to do a half marathon, or an endurance competitions, which have become so popular these days. So really, really useful. Dr. Karp, before we close this up, can you share some information about yourself in terms of your social media accounts, your Facebook accounts, Instagram, website, all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Well, people can find me through social media. It's at Dr. Jason Karp, with a K, Karp with a K, K-A-R-P. And on my website, two websites, one for the certification program, which is revolutionrunning.com with a 2 after the O. It's an acronym for running economy, VO2 max and lactate threshold. So Revolution Running, REVO2, Revolution Running. And then my personal website has all my coaching, my books and everything is run-fit.com. RUN-FIT.com.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include that in the description for this. So Dr. Karp, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast, sharing some very insightful information. And as we talked about, and I mentioned before, I think this is a topic that can be expanded upon in a second episode. We'll see if we can make that happen and provide really good information for personal trainers in this area. Again, thank you very much.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.